Hey everyone, Ryan and I just got back from Breathe Fest and it was incredible. I don't even have words to describe it, so it looks like you're just gonna have to go next year and find out for yourself. This year, Ryan and I hosted a few workshops, and one of them was the very first in-person Slack Mass for the International Church of Slacklife. And we had a very special guest joining us. The church used your donations and the proceeds from t-shirt sales to fly out Scott Balcom, the very first highliner, to share his story about walking the Lost Arrow Spire back in 1985. He hasn't ever really shared this story on video before, so I just really wanted to share it with all of you. He happened to give his speech on Spire Day of all days, and we didn't plan this, we didn't ask for it, we didn't have a choice in the scheduling at all. It just happened to fall on the day he walked to the Spire 33 years prior, so I thought that was pretty cool. Fun fact, Scott has never been to a Slackline festival before, so thank you, Scott, for trusting some random strangers you met on the internet to fly you out there and pick you up from the airport and drive you an hour away from the airport into the middle of the woods. I know everyone there really appreciated everything you had to say. Not that Scott is old by any means, but I think it's really cool that our sport is still so young that we can still have the OGs come out and talk to us and share their version of history with us. That's really special, and I really hope you all enjoy his story as much as we all did. What it was like to be the first highliner.
So in 1983, I was in Yosemite. I was 20 years old. And I saw these two guys walking on tubular nylon webbing. They could swing the lines, they could bounce the lines, they could juggle with clubs and pass clubs back and forth on two parallel lines. And I thought, that is the shit. And I had walked rope as a child. I had walked on railroad tracks. I had walked on the edges of buildings being framed, and I was always interested in that, and sucked at ball sports and stuff. And so I was already walking on parking lot chains and stuff like that. But when I saw Slackline, there was this dynamic about it that was so awesome. And Adam Grosowski, the very first Slackliner, who started slacklining because he saw that everybody could walk the chain in Yosemite, went home, didn't have a chain, so he stretched a piece of 1-inch nylon webbing. And he could surf as good as anybody can surf now. And not like the rodeo line surf, but like any other kind of surf. And I was like, I'm doing that. So I left Yosemite and went home and started buying every kind of webbing that they sold at Sport Chalet in La Cañada in Southern California. And my friend Chris Carpenter was also there. He was also inspired. And in November of that year, we stretched a piece of 2-inch tubular nylon webbing underneath a freeway bridge in Pasadena. And tubular nylon webbing is what we used to use for swami belts. Harnesses were just coming in, and most people wore a swami belt. And it was, so I bought this big piece, and we walked in underneath. We had a belay, and we had, because it was arches, so if the whole line went down, you would just swing. And so it seemed fairly safe. It was pretty short. Chris Carpenter and I both walked it. And then I wanted to walk the Lost Arrow Spire. And the 2-inch line didn't work in the park. I stretched it in the park at 80 feet, and I started seeing how much it fluttered. And also, I wasn't sure that I trusted just one line. Even though it was 6,600 pounds, I thought that was enough. Didn't put a serious amount of tension on it. So I, through some time, and I came up with an idea of threading 2 pieces of 9/16 inside a piece of 1-inch tubular. And I did this, and I walked this in the park, and the line was heavy, but it felt pretty safe because it had redundancy built into it. And in 1984, I went up to the Lost Arrow Spire and scared the shit out of myself because the bridge walk wasn't scary enough to prepare me to walk the spire, and I hadn't done any big walls. As soon as I was on top of the spire, I was wishing that I wasn't there. And my mind was racing. Like they say that your life flashes in front of your eyes before you die. And I feel like your mind is squirming and you're trying to like compress everything into that moment. And I didn't even want to be there. I thought this was supposed to be fun. You know, I hadn't heard of like second degree fun and that sort of stuff. And so I was like, I thought this was, anyway. So I fell a bunch of times and I thought I was giving up too easy. So I decided, okay, this time I'm really gonna try. I have to try really hard. I'm giving up too easy, I'm jumping back, I'm falling and catching. And so, so I get a couple steps out and I was walking and I wanted to make sure, I didn't scoot out on the line at all because I didn't want anyone to say, well, you scooted out on the line and then you gotta, I wanted to walk from the spire to the flake on the other side. And, you know, every step. And because I didn't want anyone to say, well, that's not, you didn't really do it. And nobody had done it before, but I just knew how people were. So, right, nothing has changed except more people do it. So I'm gonna try really hard this time. Take a couple steps out, and the line, you know, the beginning of the line is really hard. And so I tried really hard. By the time I realized I'm falling, I'm looking between my outstretched arms into the Lost Arrow chimney. And I had read a story about the people that explored the Lost Arrow chimney, and one guy had rappelled off of the end of the rope into the Lost Arrow chimney. And of course it was a fatal situation. And I was the Lost Arrow chimney's next meal as I'm falling between my outstretched arms. And then all of a sudden I'm looking at the notch that's only 250 feet below. And then I'm looking at the valley floor, you know, roughly 2,891 feet down or whatever it is. And then I'm swinging like this, and then I just instinctively grabbed the line, and then I was back up on the spire, and it was like throwing a cat in a bathtub, you know, how fast it clings to your head after that. And so I was just freaked, completely freaked. And my friend Darren, who climbed the spire for me and was sitting right there on the spire, he goes, "That was rad! That was," and we hadn't been climbing very long, and so we were pretty young and fairly inexperienced. He goes, "That was rad! That was the coolest thing I've ever seen any of us do. You were flying through the sky like Superman with your arms stretched out in front of you. You screamed like a girl." I don't remember screaming like anything. I just remember thinking I was gonna die. So I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And then I thought, I'm giving up too easy. So I gave it another try, and this time I turned around and jumped back at the spire, bounced off of it, and spun around and got to look through my feet at the view. And then I was like, all right, I can't do this. And so I bagged it. And then the bridge wasn't scary enough to prepare me for the spire, but the spire was scary enough to prepare me for the spire. So the next year, 1985, on July 13th, I was much more prepared psychologically, and I stopped on the bridge walk. I'd gotten a couple steps out, and I was really scared, and then all of a sudden I locked in, and I was just like, oh, okay, and I just walked to the other side. And that's what I thought it was going to be on the spire. All I got to do is the first 3 or 4 steps, and then I'll be able to do it. Well, that wasn't really the case. And I didn't get that locked-in feeling. So finally, so in 85, I was more focused, and I tried a bunch of times, and I got halfway out one time and I fell, and then I got a third of the way out one time and I fell. And then I got about 4 or 5 steps out, and I'm balancing, and I'm lusting for the other side. I want to be over there. A friend of mine was sitting on the flake, and I was like, I just want to be over there. I just want to be over there. And then I'm like, okay, wait a minute. You're 4 or 5 steps out. You've only been this far out, like three times. And so, because the beginning of the line is the hardest, so just focus on balance right now. Okay, make an adjustment. Okay, balance, balance. And I just started being right where I was. And I felt like I was in cold water. I'm like, the further away I get from and I'm out in the sky, and I thought it would be like, I'm walking with the birds, and this is great. And it wasn't like that at all. It was like tunnel vision, and it's closing down. I'm like, no, I have to be able to see. So I get about, I wasn't aware of being out in the middle. I wasn't aware of any of that. I was still just trying to compress my whole intention into just now the balance of the moment. I got about 20 feet from the other side, and I finally got locked in. And I finally There isn't much exposure. I'm looking at the wall. I'm looking my friend in the eye. And at that moment, it clicked. I knew I had it. And I just like step on the flake. And yeah, you know, it was an awesome experience. My dad was there. My sister was there. The woman that would become my wife and the mother of this kid right here, this small child, was also there. So that worked out for quite a while. So to me, it was like an art project. It was like, I can do this on the ground. I should be able to do up high. It's easy, right? It's mind over matter. It turned out there's like this lizard brain thing that kind of got in the way of the mind over matter thing. Every cell, the first time, every cell in my body, individually and in unison, I could feel this, was screaming, don't do it! And to overcome that, I'm sure a lot of you have been on a highline, and you've probably experienced the same thing. And overriding that is tremendously difficult. So, so I went home, and that was it. I had a friend, Darren Carter, who I grew up with, and he's a big muscly guy, and he sucked at slacklining. And he kept on hoping it would go away. Other people are hacky-sacking and stuff, and we're slacklining, so we were the freaks, and nobody else was doing it. And they're like, don't you want a hacky? And I'm like, don't you want a slackline? And they're like, well, why would we do that? So Darren hung around it. He kept on hoping it would go away because he only could trust his arms. He was like, he could hold on to anything, but balancing with his feet. You know, he's terrible on slab and all that sort of stuff, and, you know, pedaling and, you know. So eventually, after years went by, he got good at it. And I'm like, Darren, you're really good, and you've never owned your own line. You've never set it up yourself. You should do this. You know, you're actually really good at it. So he went to Hawaii, and he took my advice, or probably it was his idea that started getting better at it. And then there was this guy called Chuck Tucker who had taught us how to rock climb. We had met him in Joshua Tree, just driving by looking for a campsite. And eventually he became known as Chongo, but he was just Chuck to us. And so Chuck and Darren started practicing and getting better. And Chuck was there at the beginning, but he wasn't very good. And so they practiced, and they were still going to Yosemite every year. I was raising a kid, living in Tucson, and had a house. And then in 1995, Darren had gotten really, Darren eventually walked the Lost Arrow Spire in 1993. So it was 8 years later. So nothing really happened for that long. And then he walked it, Chongo walked it in 94, and in 95, all of us, all three of us walked it. And my son was 5 years old at the time, and I had to deal with my own fear, but then I also had to deal with the anxiety that if anything happened, my son wouldn't know me. And I thought it was my responsibility to be there for him. So I walked across once, and Darren walked across back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And that was the day that he realized the mastery of highlining. Well, he did before at another walk, but then at the Spire was kind of the test piece because it's so high. And Darren used to thank me for inventing his sport, and I said, to me, it was like an art project. You're the one that invented the sport. You made it a sport, not me. And then Dean Potter walked the Spire in 1998, and Darren had already free soloed it in 95. And then when Dean free soloed it, everyone's like, when he walked it, it became more spread known. And everyone says, you're going to die. And he didn't die doing that. And I didn't die doing that. You guys haven't died doing that. Oh, that was the other thing I forgot, is everyone told me I was going to die. So I was like, nah, I'm not going to die. So anyway, that's the basic beginning. And once Dean did it, everybody wanted to do it. So we weren't good climbers, so people didn't care that we could do it. But you know, we were just freaks. But when Dean did it, then everybody wanted to do it. So that was the basic beginning of that.
Isn't it actually Spire Day today? You were telling us?
Oh.
Today is Spire Day. Today is the only day that I've ever walked the Lost Arrow Spire. And in 1985, I walked from the spire to the flake, and in 1995, I walked from the flake to the spire. But so that's the basic early history, and there's obviously more to it than that. And I value my relationship with balance. Balance is something. It feels really good having that conversation with balance, where you listen and you respond, and you listen and you respond. To me, that's like a dance. It's like a conversation, and it feels really good. And that has always been a spiritual practice to me. I'm not sure what Slacklife is supposed to mean, but balance is where I'm at. So, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, what was the rig like for your Lost Arrow Spire? Did you use rope for your anchors, span sets?
I rappelled down to the flake, and beforehand, and I looked and I could see that a number 10 and 11 hex would look opposing. And in my dreams, and like right before falling asleep, I had this anxiety that if I put cams behind it, that I'd pull the whole flake off. And then, you know, when you're there, you see it's pretty big. But when you're thinking about it in your mind and you're thinking about all the things that can go wrong, you're like, it was a concern. And hexes, you know, giant hexes, they don't go anywhere. So I opposed the two hexes on the flake side, and then I had another stopper in there, but that was kind of not as important. And then there's like a little notch, and I had the line coming out of there. And then I thought, well, if the whole flake did break off, I'm going to tie to the tree above. So I had a rope going up to the tree above, which is kind of a no-brainer. And then I just clipped to the bolts. I didn't go down like the bolt ladder on the spire. I had, there was the line of 1 inch with 2 pieces of 9/16 inside of it. And I also had a piece of 3 mil purlon to fill the space. And I had a come along that I had broken a couple times. It didn't have a bolt on and I had jury rigged it back together, but it was just for tensioning. And the most dangerous thing I did was that the line, to adjust the length of the line, I tied a clove hitch and clipped 2 carabiners through it and pulled off of that. But then that line was clipped to the anchors, the tail of it. Years and years later, Dean Potter walks up to me at the OR show, and he says, you know, I tested the way you rigged the spire, and it broke at 3,300 pounds. And I was like, well, wait a minute, tell me about that. He goes, oh, I see my friends, I'll see you later. I'm like, Dean! He's like, no. And he runs off, and I'm like, so I later tested it, and he was actually right. The clove hitch breaks. And it's when nylon is strong when it's in its flat way. If you crumple it, it becomes weak because you can isolate fibers. And so the clove hitch, and even though it's triple lined, it still really squeezes it, and it'll break right there, right where it goes into the knot. Every time it'll break in the same spot, and because it's significantly weaker than everything else. The other side was tied with a figure 8, and but the thing is that tight lines were a thing for a while, and most of the lines around here are too tight for me because I like them more slack. But my line wasn't that tight, so I probably only had about 800 pounds on it at any time in a fall, or, you know, and so really 3,300 pounds wasn't completely ridiculous, but I thought it was, you know, more than that. So I knew clove hitches were weak in a rope. I didn't realize that in webbing it's even weaker.
So were you still wearing a swami belt for that?
Oh yeah, I had a swami belt. I might have had leg loops. I had 2 locking carabiners and 2 leashes, and I taped the hinges of the locking carabiners with climbing tape. And I mean, I noticed they had a sharp edge. I wasn't completely dumb. And yeah, I mean, that was the basic setup.
Take a whipper with the swami?
Well, yeah, the first time, the Superman whipper was on a swami. But it didn't hurt because I was looking at the view. I might have had hickeys here afterwards, though.
Did you have climb the spire? Did you guys climb the spire?
What's that?
Did you climb the spire, or did you?
I have never actually climbed the spire. I knew I needed help. It takes 3 ropes to climb the spire tip, and then the line is as heavy as a rope. It takes a little bit, it takes gear to climb the spire tip, and it takes gear to set up the thing. So I enlisted the help of some friends. There was some climber friends. I said, you know, I'm doing this project, and, you know, God, it's a long hike, it's a big deal. They're like, oh fuck no, we want to see this, we'll go. So it was actually easier than I thought to recruit people. So they climbed the tip for me, and they were really great. We got it loosely rigged the night before, spent the night up on the rim, and the next morning waited for the wind window. The wind was blowing out of the high country all night, stopped right before dawn, and then it starts to, you know, the walls start to heat up and it starts to blow a little bit. And my dad was there, and he brought a video camera. This is 1985. It had a VHS tape in it. And he's like, you better get out there. And I'm like,
Were your folks, it sounds like they were pretty supportive?
My dad says that my mom was a smart one, she didn't go.
Did she support you from afar?
Well, you know, when I was that age, I was 22, I thought, my mom's got other kids, she'd get over it. And then after having a kid, I realized, oh, that was kind of cruel.
On the day that you had that cross, did anybody else attempt that line?
The day that I walked? A guy named Paul Bourne attempted it, but he could barely walk it on the ground. So he just thought he would get lucky. But he could barely, you know, he wasn't really a very good slackliner. So he certainly, if he had done his homework and actually learned to slackline, he actually had a pretty good shot at it. But yeah.
He learned with a swami at the Lost Arrow Spire?
No, he walked my line in the valley floor a few times, made it across once, and it's like, I'm ready.
I can appreciate go-getters. Yeah.
He was a go-getter, all right. I heard that his last moments were running into an electric power line on a parasail or something. And so that was some years back. Anyone else?
Figure out if you needed to be able to start in the middle of the line and not always walk into it. And then, like, where did the Chongo name? That guy was nicknamed that before he started?
Okay, so that's two different questions. But I realized that I always got up on the line in the middle of the line, like standing, and I realized that that's not possible up high. So you got to come up with a way to get on the line if you fall. So I learned to climb back up on the line, but I also practiced the very ends of the line because I wanted to walk the whole thing. Chongo and Darren and I all did mounts differently. And there was a walk I wanted to do in Tucson, above Tucson, that eventually I did, but in a couple years after the Spire, I wanted to do this walk, and there was a what I call reef underneath it. It was like rock that you could hit, and you had to get out far enough. So I got really good at the line mount then because I didn't want to have to fall right at that spot. And then Darren and Chongo both had their own line mounts, and I had mine. We all did it different ways. And I don't know why everybody calls it the Chongo now.
I might be able to answer that. I talked to Chongo.
Yeah.
And Chongo, okay. I talked to Chongo recently. I haven't transcribed the interview yet, and if you want to see more details of his, it's in the Book of Slack on the website, Church of Slacklife, and there's a lot of detail of more of the story he just told you. Yeah, there's a lot of it. Chongo, I asked him where that name came from, and he's like, I don't know. People just started calling it to me. He's like, I only do that a couple times. He's like, and that was really bad for your knees. So, it is.
See, but now wait a minute. But
he said he did it like that, but he's like, I didn't tell anyone to start calling it this. I didn't really teach too many people.
But there's more to it than that. I think that there was like terms get changed as they go through and things happen. But when I wrote a book in 03 or something, The Art of Balance and Craft of Slackline. And in that book, I show the different mounts that I explain them. I show my mount and I explain the different mounts. And I call Chongo sometimes had a belly, and he wasn't as young and fit as we were. But he would get up on the line, and then he would be on the line and he would grab the line to pull himself up. and something if you're going uphill, it's hard not to do that. And so I called that the Chongo grab in the book. And then I don't know if that helped get that out there. I mean, it did because I sold more than 3 books. So I think that got out there, but I think it got changed a little bit because it seems like people call any mount a Chongo, or is it only when you rock back?
It's this one where you like sit here and then you bring it here like a...
See, and that's kind of more like the way Darren did it. I'll sit down and then just stand up. And then Darren would hang a foot and rock back and then stand up. And Chongo would grab the line and pull himself up. And sometimes he's like, and that was the Chongo grab. And so yeah, so it's gotten distorted over time.
Where can we get your books?
Yeah.
It's out of print. There's 1,600 out there somewhere. I have one. All right. It's one of 1,600. So a funny thing happened. When I sold all of them, but it took a long time, and I decided I was done with that. I wasn't going to reprint it. And so I had a distributor that said, we want more books, and I was like, okay, here's the last of the books. And they put it in a computer that's now out of print. And all of a sudden, the book on like Amazon or something went up to like $200, and then $300. And then it was like over do you remember this?
This happens all the time with climbing guys. Like, there'll be like a $600 climbing guide, and you're just like...
Yeah, no, and then it went over $1,000. And I'm like, only Madonna would buy that. I mean, nobody's gonna buy that at $1,000. And people are like, oh, you should reprint it. I'm like, that's not really what it, and people are like, you mean I could get rid of this thing? No, not really. So, yeah, but I'm currently working on a storybook. The book that I wrote was fairly specific to beginning slacklining, and the most useful information was probably A-frames and ground anchors and stuff like that. But slacklining was going so fast in such a different direction that it wasn't worth reprinting. But I'm writing a book now about all the stories and the people involved in our group, which include me, Chris Carpenter, who helped me do the first line, Darren Carter, who was the first one to solo and first one to master it, Chongo, who's Chongo, and my brother, who started Slackline Brothers, the very first Slackline company. And between us, we had a lot of contributions, and so it's going to be just stories, and then the whole thing is sort of a story, but there'll be individual campfire stories.
I think a lot of people are interested.
Just out of curiosity, when you first started all this, how did you see it coming, in the future? Like, what was your original plan? And then looking around, seeing this festival, seeing other stuff, how do you feel about the sport and where it's gone?
I'm stunned. I'm absolutely stunned. I was tripping on this the other night, and then I got here a day before my son Adam, who's seen this his whole life, and he said, it's really weird being at a place where everyone can slackline. And I was like, right? That's what I was tripping on. So I never imagined this. I remember thinking, I wonder if this will ever be something. And I thought, I wonder if, and I knew that people would take what they have and make it better. And I thought, like, everyone adds. And even if you're not breaking records, you're still adding to style, to, everything. And I wondered, would people ever walk really long lines? I'm like, no, I don't even think that. That's stupid. And I was stunned by the Castleton line, which had gorgeous footage, gorgeous line, half a kilometer. I was just blown away. And then, what was it, 2 months later, somebody walked twice as far?
Yeah.
I couldn't believe, and now a mile? Now it's so, now you need a weather report because your line's gonna melt from lightning if you don't, or even if there's static in the air. Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, I never anticipated that shit. Never, never. Okay, my long line, my longest line when I was 20 or 22, 117 feet, and that was fucking long. I had Chongo stand at the other end so you could see how long it was. And while I was on the line, and I thought that was, nobody will beat this record. Trick lining, I never even imagined. I walked a loose line. I didn't even know air was possible for the first 20 years I slacklined. Like, I was like, people get air? No, bullshit. You're fucking lying to me.
When they fall off, right?
Yeah, only when you fall, only when you Superman. Which was, you know, the precursor to the Luke Skywalker, but I just didn't quite. I did land on the spire, though.
Something I thought was interesting is he lived with Chongo, you and Chris Carpenter and your
No, Chris wasn't there. My brother, it was my brother's house, and Chongo and I both at the same time were renting from, well, my brother paid all the bills and we paid him. We all lived together.
No point to that.
And we had slack lines in the front yard, and people would get clotheslined on them all the time, and because they went right across the walkway coming up to the front.
Do you still slackline? Do you still slackline and highline?
Yeah, I can slackline. I can walk on almost anything except everything that's set up here. My line is a 9/16 piece, about 44, 43 feet long. I rig it about this high. It stretches enough that I'm only about this high off the ground. I can swing it, and I'm a little out of practice now, but I can. But when I do, it's always, I love that conversation with the line, that, like, I just get into the awareness of balance in it. I'm not trying to break any records, unless 43 feet's a record. No, it wasn't. It was never, well, just because no one else, there was no participants.
Yeah, tell us about that. How was it having literally no community? Scary?
Well, in the beginning, everybody told me I was going to die, but I walked on a 9/16 piece of line. I rode it back and forth. I jumped up and down on it. I never broke a piece, ever, until we slammed one in a car door, and it tore slowly. So I mean, I had a small community. I had Chris Carpenter, who I just went backpacking with the Trinity Alps with, so he's still a good friend. But it was very different. It was, but I was doing it because no one was doing it. I was, you know, young men are competitive, and I didn't want to compete with them, so I did something else that nobody else was doing.
If your book's not going to come back into reprint, maybe you can put out an ebook through your website and not have Amazon steal your money. For us Slackline fanatics that want those.
But see, the information is so outdated now. That's so.
It's so outdated. We want to read it.
Right, because now it's a comic book.
Once 20 years goes by, it becomes a classic.
Right, it's an antique now.
Yeah, yeah.
To read more about it, there's over 50 pages of Slackline history in the Book of Slack on the church website at www.churchofslacklife.com. So go check it out.